All right, so before I dive into this video, I want to talk a bit about why it took so long to make this video. The other videos I kind of fired out like 1 week, 2 weeks, whatever. And so in this video, I'm going to be going into the parts that I want to use for the car and how I plan on approaching the build and kind of a really detailed breakdown of what I'm going to do before I get started. And more often than not, throughout the course of researching and coming up with crazy ideas like, oh, should I take an engine out of a brand new Corvette from a wrecked one and shove it in this thing and try and make that work? Over and over, I just kind of kept reaching for my phone to call my dad and ask him what I should do. You know, what transmission would go with this engine? What should I do with this? And that was a little bit more difficult than I expected. So it took me a little bit longer to put this one together. And I'm sure there'll be plenty of those things throughout the course of making these videos. Which kind of leads me to the next thing I wanted to talk about before jumping into the subject matter at hand, which is why I'm choosing to do things this way. I just as easily could have, I guess, just worked on the car on my own and, kept friends and family in the loop and things like that. Why do I feel the need to make videos and put it out there publicly? Well, the first reason is because I like doing it. I used to do a video series and a podcast for musicians in the Chicago area, which my dad loved and was very proud of when I was doing. So I felt like this was kind of a natural thing to do to transition that into something to honor my dad. But in addition to that, not exaggerating at all, there's literally people around the world who my dad meant a lot to. There's people that he used to work with that live in England that started following the page when I started posting these videos. So, it is a cool way to get it out in front of people that my dad meant a lot to. So, we'll see what happens with it. And, if there does end up being some sort of following to it, that could be an opportunity to do some good in honor of my dad. So those are just a few things. I could go on and on about reasons why I'm doing this, but that's just something that nobody brought to my attention that I felt like I wanted to get out there. But let's get into it. So, first thing we want to do, let's talk about the good. So, starting off with the good, we've got the body. Now, the thing with the body is, it is a fiberglass body. I've never worked with a fiberglass body, and honestly, someone's probably going to hop in the comments and say, that thing's a piece of shit, it doesn't suck, whatever. I think for all intents and purposes, for that thing sitting for 20 years, there's no cracks, there's no breaks in the body, there's going to need a little bit of body work, but the fact that it's in that good a shape, being an original 63 Corvette body, is really awesome. Look, I keep saying the body's in really good shape, and then some of you are watching that video and saying, what the f*** are you talking about? Look, I know it's not in great shape, but it's... when I walked into the garage, I was about 90% sure I was going to look at the car and it was going to need to be scrapped. Like the project was going to be a no-go. So to see the body still in good enough shape to be reasonable to restore and get into condition to paint, that was very exciting to me. I am not delusional. I understand that the paint and the time and the work going into it is going to take a lot of time and money, which is going to be interesting because I've actually never worked on a fiberglass body car. So that should be a fun one to try and figure out. Second, we've got the frame. The frame is great because that was a custom built frame for the car. So it is a C2 chassis, but it has C4 suspension architecture. So what that means is essentially it fits a C2 Corvette chassis. The body is going to fit in and drop on rail. Everything's going to mount up right from the original 63, but we get the benefit of newer Corvette suspension. Frame's a tricky one because while the frame is in good shape, the parts that are on the frame are pretty localized to a C4 Corvette, so like a late 90s Corvette. The problem with that is if I ever wanted to put like a new rear end in the car. So for right now, it's got a Dana 44 rear end. It's a good rear end. It should be able to handle more than the power that I'm wanting this car to make. I don't want this thing to be crazy, but that Dana 44 is built into support braces on either side. The housing for the rear end fits right in and it's on either side. So I'm kind of stuck with that. And so stuff like that, it's tricky to figure out looking at the budget that I made. You know, it's $8,000 and some change to finish the chassis, I'm estimating. So the tricky part is if I were to sell that frame or get any money out of that frame, how far off am I from going and buying like a new frame with all the suspension and brakes and everything from a Roadster shop or something along those lines? Those are things that I have to figure out pretty quick. I actually went and spent some time and talked to the fine folks over there at Roadster Shop who were super nice and kind enough to walk me through their shop and kind of give me a rundown on what putting one of these more modern chassis under a Corvette of this age looks like, which is cool. I got some great information from them and really good direction on things that I might need to do that I didn't even think of doing. So that'll be super helpful. I just have to kind of figure out my game plan with that. That being said, the fact that it's a C4 Corvette underpinnings are not all bad, because the great thing about C4 Corvettes is part availability. I can't spell. Shit.
Wow.
Okay. A-V-A. We're going to pretend I didn't say any of that. Part availability. We're going to ignore that. Part availability. It's everywhere. Those cars are everywhere. The parts for those cars to make them good are everywhere. And back in the 90s, they were pretty badass cars. They were tearing up road circuits everywhere. They were great handling cars. So it's not a bad choice to build the chassis as it sits. And from a cost perspective, the C4 stuff is going to be significantly cheaper than if I went with anything more modern. So just things I've got to figure out. I think as it sits right now, I'm leaning towards sticking with the current chassis as it sits and just doing some upgrades to it. We'll just have to go from there. All right. Now for the fun part. Let's talk about the bad. So, there's a lot of it. I don't want to seem like I'm negative on this car or I'm like, oh, this project's never going to get done. But I'm worried we're going to run out of space on the page. So let's just dive into it here. So first things first, the suspension. So as I mentioned in the goods section, we do have C4 Corvette suspension architecture, which means there is plenty of aftermarket options. The problem with those aftermarket options, they're very expensive. You know, I remembered that there was suspension sitting there. I was hoping that by some miracle it would still be salvageable. I should have known better. It's been sitting far too long, but it's done. I mean, it was leaking fluid all over my hands, and it sucks because they were nice. They were Bilstein coils and stuff like that, and they were leaking suspension fluid all over my hands, and yeah, it's a no-go. So that's the first big one. That's going to be expensive. The second big one that's also going to be expensive, and even more important perhaps, is the brakes, because the car needs to stop. So I'm not sure what direction I'm going to head. I'm sure I could find some C4 brakes off of just a regular C4 Corvette, and that would be more than sufficient. However, to build this thing through the way that I want to, I would be looking to do something more like a Wilwood big brake kit or something with a little bit more performance that I think will complement the style of the car. As we discussed, it's going to be more of a resto mod, so modern Corvette parts underneath. It's going to perform more like a modern car, but still have the equally badassness of a C2 Corvette, because let's be real, it's one of the coolest looking cars of all time. In order to get that, even just from an aesthetic standpoint, you got to have a big brake kit under there. But the big brake kit has to sit under nice wheels and tires, which, I feel like there's a running theme here, are very expensive. So wheels and tires, that's going to be a tough one because I have to figure out what the bolt pattern is on those. I'm not 100% sure if that is still equivalent to a C4 Corvette. I know some of those parts were aftermarket on the rear end of the frame with that subframe and that whole assembly under there. So that I'm going to have to do a little bit more digging. I did talk to my uncle a little bit, and it skipped my mind to ask him if he knew that that's what it was. But at the end of the day, I would love to do some fat BBS style wheels and, you know, slam the car, not slam it to the ground, but make it look super cool. More aggressive stance, all that kind of thing. But that is where money comes into play. And finally, the big one, the engine. So I'm still trying to decide what I want to do with the engine in this car. So at one point, we had a 5.7 LS that was sitting there that we were going to put in the car. When we stopped working on the car, someone offered to buy it. We sold it to them. I think I still want to stick with the LS platform. Maybe if I get lucky and find a new LT series motor from the C8 Corvettes and can make that work in this car, that would be amazing. Part of me wants to just say I'm going to buy a crate motor that works and it's done. And part of me feels like that's a cop-out and I need to build my own engine for this car. Otherwise, it's a little bit cheap. So the two routes we can go, if we build it, it'll honestly probably be way cheaper, and I'll get to choose my own parts, right? So choosing my own parts, kind of designing how that motor is going to sound, how it's going to perform, what aspects of what I'm building are going to relate to that. And it'll probably be less expensive. I mean, I found a handful of LS engines that are in need of a rebuild on Facebook Marketplace for like $600. So that's doable for sure. And then if we went with the crate engine, then obviously that's going to be much more expensive. And it'll be less personality, I feel like. It's, you know, it's crate engine. It's going to do exactly what they say it's going to do out of the box, and it's cool. We can drop it in, and it'll sound great, and it'll look great, and it'll perform great. But like I said, I kind of feel like that might be the cop-out option, is to buy an engine instead of build one. I feel like Scott would want me to build the engine to this car. Have I ever built an engine? I've worked on engines. How hard could it be to build it from the ground up? You know? Anyways, the big overarching theme of the bad section here is unfortunately money. This is all stuff that to me is non-negotiable. I mean, the car has to have good suspension. The car has to be able to stop. The car has to look great and perform great on good wheels and tires. And most importantly, the engine. That's a non-negotiable. The engine needs to be exactly what it needs to be. In order to accomplish all of that, yeah, it's gonna cost a chunk of change. We've talked about the good, we've talked about the bad. Let's talk about the ugly. That's gonna be tricky. So I've got to find some way to make the budget of this car more approachable. Because I don't have an extra $30-something thousand to throw around on this car. And I definitely wasn't expecting to have to build this car. So that part of this is going to be tricky. My dad always used to tell me to strive for 1% better every day. So, he was very adamant and very insistent on the fact that if you do one thing every day, working towards your final goal, eventually you would just get there and you wouldn't even realize how far you've come to begin with. So that's all I'm going to do here is try and do 1% better every day, and we'll go from there.